The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this month's Rancher Overview training. It looks like we're gonna have a big turnout today, so thanks everyone for coming to learn about Rancher and getting started using Rancher to manage your container environments. I'm Shannon Williams. I'm one of the co-founders here at Rancher and run our sales and marketing teams. I'm joined today by Denise Shannon.
Shannon, just want to interrupt. Are you sharing anything on your screen?
Yeah, I think it is sharing. Can you see it?
I can now see it. I couldn't see it
Okay.
before.
Yeah, I think I hadn't hit share, so good. You should see it now. Okay, so yeah, thanks for having us, Denise. You've now met everyone. Hi, Denise.
Hello, everyone.
Denise is our fantastic support and manager. She works with tons of people on Twitter and the internet, and she is going to be giving you the overview training today and diving into a demonstration of how to use Rancher and answering your questions. Just as a real quick overview of what we're going to try and do today, we really, these are introductory Rancher classes. We run them every week, every month, I should say. They are really meant for people that are relatively new to Rancher, so we don't get into the deepest, we're really trying to set out a kind of a 101 level introduction to how to set up and use Rancher to deploy your Kubernetes or Mesos or Swarm or Cattle clusters. In general, the trainings are very hands-on, so we try to keep the slides to a minimum. So there'll be a few slides that we'll go through at the beginning, but by and large, this is going to be a demonstration. So we're going to be showing you how to use Rancher. If as we're demoing, if you've got questions and you want to ask them, please fire away. You can ask your questions at any given time. I'll be chatting with you on the questions bar. I may ask Denise some of the questions so we can discuss them out loud. If you ask a question and it's sort of general, I may reply back to everyone so they can see your question and the answer. So if you have like a private question that you don't want me to send out to everyone, please let me know when you mark it. And we're scheduled for about an hour to an hour and 10 minutes. But if you have lots of questions and you want to get them answered, by all means, stick around. We'll stay until we've got all your questions answered. So this doesn't have a hard stop. It is meant to be, really to help everyone who comes today get all their questions about Rancher, containers, Docker, Kubernetes, whatever you have questions about answered. The first thing I do want to ask, though, is just maybe if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about your experience with Rancher. We tend to get, a lot of new people on these sessions, but sometimes we have people who've been here a long time. So, we kind of ask you to lump yourself into one of three levels of experience, either sort of city slicker, brand new, learning to use Rancher for the first time, kind of cowpoke who's been around the block a bit, or a Rancher Pro who's used it tons out there. So I'm gonna launch the poll. If you don't mind, you should see the poll option for you to respond. So please, click away. Let us know your level of experience, and hopefully we can. If we do see that there's a lot of people with a lot of experience, we can maybe dive in a little bit deeper if that makes sense. But I'll give it just another second. It looks like we've got almost everyone voted. I'm going to close the poll now, 79%, and share it. So hopefully everyone can see, but it looks like we're a pretty good mix of first-timers, brand new to Rancher, and sort of cowpokes. So that's great. If you're a user of Rancher and there's a question that's getting asked and you'd like to throw an answer out there, use the questions tab to fire away. It's the best way to chat and get connected to each other. We're going to be talking a lot today and showing the product, but when you leave here and you need information, the absolute best resources are the docs. These are live web docs. We update them all the time. They're changing with every release of Rancher, really every week, every 2 weeks. So visit the docs, use those to help you if you're struggling. Obviously, docs are only so useful. A lot of times they don't cover the big questions you're struck with or when something isn't performing the way it's supposed to. So we we also have forums are an open place to ask questions, to get information about Rancher from other users, from our team who sits on those forums as well. So we try to answer as many of these as we can. The reality is Rancher's, there's more than 1 million downloads of Rancher and 10 million agents now running out there. We really can't keep up with everything in the community, so we do our best. But if you're struggling, feel free to ping us on Twitter, or we have an IRC channel that is hashtag Rancher. You can contact us there on Freenode. So there's lots of different ways to get in touch, and if you're really struggling, let us know. We also do provide consulting services and support. It's how we pay the bills. So if you are at the point where you're putting Rancher in production and you need to, you want to have a traditional sort of enterprise support contract, by all means. There's in Rancher you can click on Get Support. You can find it on our website, and obviously we work a lot closer with those companies than we do with everyone in the open source community. So that's always another way to get some help. Okay, now getting started. We have a lot to cover today. We're going to try and go through a number of topics. We're going to start by kind of walking you through how to set up a Rancher environment and get access control configured so that you can control who's touching the system. Then we're going to go through the idea of environments and how to create them. The differences at high level between Kubernetes, Swarm, and Mesos. We'll talk about registries a little bit. We'll talk about, more importantly, adding hosts and adding infrastructure to your clusters as you create them. We'll kind of walk through the different ways of accessing the Rancher platform, whether using the UI, which is mostly what we'll be demoing, or using the Rancher CLI or API, which is kind of the root of all access. Then we'll go through launching a little containerized application using the catalog, using compose files, creating stacks, more of the application design stuff, the load balancers, service discovery, health checks, etc. So we'll talk through some of those beasts and hopefully give you enough information to really get started with Rancher. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Denise. Denise, I'm going to make you the presenter, and let's kick it off.
Okay, that sounds great. Can you see my screen?
I can see your screen.
Okay. So let's see. The first thing I've done, so there are a couple things I want to preface in terms of what I did to prepare for the training session. Everything else I've been doing, nothing is set up. Everything is definitely live, so usually I have a fairly high success rate in everything doing what I expected to go through. So first, I've set up a couple hosts that are running Docker. I have all of them are actually running Rancher OS in AWS. They have what's it called? I have a couple of them that are running our latest Rancher OS running Docker 1.12.1, and then I have a couple running Docker 1.10.3 to be able to showcase Kubernetes a little bit. The very first thing I did before is all I did was I started the Rancher server container. So let's see, you can see, kind of see my command there, where all I did was a Docker run, had the container detached, exposing port 8080, and then I used actually our latest development build. This is not what is tagged to latest right now. You'd have to specifically tag, use this tag to get this build. I use that because that has the latest and greatest of what we're doing. It goes through our normal QA automation, but it's not something that we commercially support yet, I'd say. So once you have that running, I started beforehand just because it takes, a couple minutes for it to get started. And you can see here are the logs that have started. This is what the logs would look like for you if you had started Rancher server. And what you see is really once you get to this section where it says startup succeeded, listening on the section here, that means you could actually start accessing Rancher server in the UI. So here, the first thing you'll do is when you get set up in the UI, you'll get this welcome screen. We just recently added in this welcome screen to see if you would be willing to share some statistics with us. This is actually super helpful for us in the sense that with these anonymous statistics, it would help us understand, where are people really using Rancher, kind of like which container orchestration are they using to help us figure out where we should focus our efforts in terms of road mapping. So I highly recommend letting us collect your anonymous stats. I'm going to go back to the docs real quick in terms of installing Rancher. There's lots and lots of ways to be able to install Rancher. I just did what I consider a plain vanilla install of Rancher. You can find in the docs under installing Rancher server. I went to the single node, and I basically copied this command right here. The only part I left out was the restart policy, just because I don't expect anything to happen in my demo today in terms of what would happen if my box restarted. But here it talks a little bit about the Rancher server tags that I just mentioned, about how our latest tag is will be a little different than the one that I'm using today. It talks about how, with this command, the port will be exposed at port 8080. So that's where you would want to go on your server. We do support a different variations of how you would want to set up Rancher server. So one is inside Rancher server, we do have access control, so authentication within Rancher. We do have Active Directory and Open LDAP, and if you want to use that over a TLS connection, then you'd have to actually use pass in that certificate that you want when you start Rancher server. So that's one thing to know. Right now, inside of our container, we have our own MySQL database that we use. There are other options of you could use an external database. Definitely, if you're using it in production, we recommend using an external database. You can bind mount the MySQL volume if you wanted. And then if you're, stuck behind some kind of HTTP proxy, there is a couple setups that you need to do on the Docker daemon side, just to be able to allow traffic to go through for a Rancher server. So these are just under the single node of how you would want to get it set up. We also have the ability to set up Rancher server in an HA setup. That one's definitely a little more complicated. It has very specific needs in terms of what ports you need to have access to, what you have up and running for it to all be working, and that kind of is laid out in this page here under the multi-nodes of setting up Rancher server. If you want to set up Rancher server with SSL, so basically have HTTPS URL, there's some configurations, some examples of being able to use Nginx or HA Proxy or Apache in front if you want. And then finally, there's going to be some people out there who are not going to have internet access at all for Rancher server. It still will work. So we give out tips of if you wanted to use your own private registry, what images you would need to put into your private registry for Rancher server to work. So that's the basics of all the different ways you could set up Rancher. If any of these are ways that you would want to, please feel free to read our docs in terms of it. As I said, I just did a nice plain vanilla install, just start up a container and let's get going. So the first thing you do is you'll log into Rancher server. We'll be asked about whether or not we want to collect stats. And then the next step is you'll want to set up what we call access control. So right now, the main thing is that everyone who has access, anyone out there could go to my IP here and access my server. So if I actually go, right now I'm running it in Chrome. So if I go into Safari, I could go to this IP, and I will be directed into Rancher server again. I'll just take a little bit because my internet is a little slow, and here you go. So I have access in there. So then the very first thing we recommend is turning on access control. So here under the admin tab, you'll see one of the options is access control. This little red button also indicates that you haven't configured access control and gives you a big warning to say that's the very first thing we recommend. Under access control, we have a couple different options. We have Active Directory, Azure, AD. You could authenticate against GitHub. We have our local, which is where you could create your own users and use our database to store basically your user data, and then Open LDAP. For the demo, the easiest one for me is to do local. So I'll make one for me, give myself a password, and then I'll turn on localauth. Now, for any of the authentication providers out there, once you enable localauth, there are a couple of things that happen. One, you get automatically logged in to your Rancher server. You can see that I'm now logged in here. Two, you'll see that I have this admin tab still available for me. If you add in a user who, or if you enable any of the other types and you add in an organization to share with your Rancher server, whenever they get logged in, they're as a user instead of an admin. And what that difference is whether or not you get access to this admin tab or not. So where you can change or edit someone's type of user is under the accounts page. So for a local authentication setup, you actually have to add in accounts. So I could add in Shannon. And here, when I add in my own accounts using the local database, I can decide if he wants to be a user or admin. I'll say I want him to be a user. And then the only difference is here, as people log in or as I create accounts, there'll be accounts created in Rancher. And then here, you can edit to be able to change whether or not you want them to be an admin or a user. So that's just a small thing to note for, especially if you launch a Rancher server and then you want to add in or change someone's type of account from an admin to user. This is the page that you would want to do it. So under the admin tab, so what does an admin have versus a user? So mainly it's whatever's under this admin tab. So the first one we're going to cover is the audit log. So audit logs basically tracks everything that someone has done. So you can see that here I've started to create accounts, do a couple of things. This page is super helpful as an admin where someone might have said, oh, my stack has disappeared. What happened? This has happened before for us, where I then poked around in our logs to find out which user deleted it, and then basically kind of confronted him to say, why did you delete this? And then talked with him about it, and we sorted it all out. So audit log is super helpful for that. I'm covered over the accounts page. Processes are a very good page. So this shows all the processes. You can go to all of them. These are all the ones that have now exited. If you ever have any issues within Rancher, you could go onto the running page to see what is currently kind of stuck and running, and then hopefully be able to go figure out, maybe you could delete that service that's just spinning up, or what other things that might be running. With access control, we covered that. So HA, if you want to do an HA setup where you wanted to do that multi-node setup, this is where you could follow the instructions of how to go from a single node to an HA node. We have the ability to add machine drivers. We'll cover a little bit this part in a little bit in a later section when we start adding in hosts itself. I'm going to just give it as an option that you have in admin. And then there are some settings that we're going to cover in a little bit later that will be more relevant when we go to those topics. So that's kind of the general setup of how we get going. So then after you start inviting people to Rancher, one of the things is that they might not actually have access to what you're showing because they need access to an environment. So what an environment is basically, yes.
Oh, there were a couple questions. There were a couple questions that came in. Just maybe for a second, if you have a minute. So the first question was about. There's a couple questions about access control. Jagish asked if it was possible to allow someone to be user of a specific environment. So can I let John be a user of dev and Tom be a user of prod, for instance? Do you want to just talk about how you allocate controls to a specific environment?
Yep. So that's exactly where I was going to go next. So that's a perfect question. So when you give access someone to your Rancher server, they don't automatically get access to any environment. You actually have to specifically grant them access to specific environments. So here, I'm going to create a new environment. I'm going to create, because I need it to demo Kubernetes, I'll create a new environment. But here, under access control, here's where you would be able to add in who actually has access to the environment. So If I've only given you granted access to Rancher server but not any environment, what happens is when you first log in, you would only be able to see your own personal default environment. You wouldn't be able to access any other environments that are in Rancher until you've been granted permissions to that specific environment. So you can add in those users when you create environments, or after an environment is created, you can add in users. You can edit basically the membership list of that environment. So here I can easily find Shannon and add him. With our other like authentication types providers, you can actually, for example, in GitHub, for any team that you're a part of, you would be able to add that whole team into it. I think with LDAP, you should be able to add in, I think they're called like the OUs, the organizational units. You could add them by that. So we have different options. Another thing to cover is even within, so I kind of talked about how we have that top layer of who has access in Rancher and what kind of access you have, admin versus user. But at the environment level, we actually have an even more detailed, I think, roles that are applicable. So one is you could be in an owner environment. So an environment, you'd be able to see everything. The next level down is member. You would be able to do everything in the environment. The only thing you couldn't do is you wouldn't be able to change who is on the membership list. So you wouldn't be able to add in new members or delete anyone. These are probably the two most common ones in terms of like when you first get started. The next is read-only. So you may have someone that you want to check out, have them check out your environment, but you don't want them to accidentally touch any of your services or your hosts. So you would make that read-only. And then the next one is restricted, where restricted means that basically anything regarding services, starting up stacks and services, which are just containers, starting up containers, you would have access to that. But in the infrastructure where the hosts, so your Linux servers that you have running somewhere, you wouldn't want them to be able to add new ones, delete them, make any changes to those servers. So that's kind of the restricted role. I kind of have also referenced that before as the developer role, where, you know, if you're a bigger company, you know, your IT team might set up or your DevOps team might set up all your infrastructure, but they don't want you to actually make any changes to it without their knowledge, so they might give you the restricted role.
Thanks, Denise. There was a question as well from Grigori about the DBs that are supported, and he was asking, you know, what different SQL options are there that are supported? You know, Grigori, I know that a few of the options, Rancher itself, when you deploy the sort of Rancher / server, has an embedded MySQL service in it. That's out of the box, gets provisioned and deployed. The other side of the, you know, another common use case people will use is an external SQL service, and there, you know, we typically recommend MySQL, MariaDB, you know, Galera, something that's basically a MySQL clone. Though you can certainly run it in any hosted SQL database like RDS, or, you know, an external. I think Azure has Azure SQL, and then Google has a SQL service. So if you're running in the cloud, you can use any of those SQL databases. I hope that answered your question, but feel free to ask a follow-up if not.
All right. That sounds good. So I'm going to, so let me see. So I think we jumped into a little bit about how, based on the question of how you can add people based on different environments, but I don't know if we necessarily covered what is an environment. So an environment is basically how you could group your resources. So the question was kind of like, well, what if I want, I think it was Tom, to be in our dev environment, and I don't remember the other name, Bob, let's say Bob wants to be on the test side. So it would be separate services, separate resources, and the way we define resources is really like your hosts and the containers that are being added into it. So I'm going to go to my infrastructure tab. I'm going to start adding some hosts into Rancher server. So here you click on add host. The very first time you get asked to add a host, we're going to ask you to set something called the host registration URL. So basically that is where your Rancher server is connected, and how any of our Rancher agents are our Rancher agents, which will be running on the host, how they can come back and connect to Rancher server. So by default, we select one. You can, if you moved Rancher server to some, domain name, you could add that in as well. I'm going to save that. And where that kind of command comes into play is how we launch our Rancher agent container. So what you imagine is Rancher server is running on a host in a container, and then all the other hosts that we're going to add into Rancher to be able to start deploying other containers onto it, they'll be running this Rancher agent container. And so we have a couple options of what you could do. So one is you could have spun up, I have already right now spun up a bunch of instances where I would just take this custom command of running the Rancher agent and add it onto the host and launch them, and that would automatically start getting them connected. The other option is we have, we also implement in the UI being able to launch hosts using Docker Machine. And so that's where the machine drivers come into play, where we actually have support for, I think, almost everything that Docker Machine supports. And so these ones are a couple ones that have some dedicated UI that we've created already to make it a little easier. I'll walk through that one in a sec. But if we go to, machine driver page, which I showed earlier, you can see that there's a lot of other options that we've added. We also have the ability for you to add in your own custom machine driver. When you add your own custom machine driver, we even have the ability to create your own custom UI for that machine driver. So there's a lot of flexibility within Rancher in terms of, if you want to use Docker Machine and you want, say, your users to only spin up hosts using, a certain cloud provider, then you have that ability to set that here, where, here I have a couple of them are defaulted as active when you start Rancher server. If you, let's see, if I activate any of the other ones, what happens is I activated OpenStack. If I go back to my host page and add a host, you'll see that that machine driver is actually under other, and you can see that OpenStack is now available for me. So I'm going to do a couple of things real quick. I'm going to launch my host here. You can look at the Rancher agent command. I recommend do not edit this. I know there are people who have tried to edit it. They've added in, a lot of people like to add in Rancher agent, add in the name Rancher agent to it. There's a reason why it doesn't exist in the first place, is because when you run this command, we actually end up running three different Rancher agent containers. One is kind of like a bootstrapping one. The other, which will have a Docker name associated with it, then we'll actually launch a Rancher agent state container, and that's just holding, it's like a data container for Rancher agent. And then finally, we'll launch a running container, which would be a Rancher agent, and it's named Rancher agent. So if you try and edit the command and add in the name to it, it ends up failing, and then you won't actually get it running. So I have these three hosts. The only thing I've done here for these three hosts is I've pre-pulled some images. You can see that I don't have anything running on it. I just pre-pulled some images just to make the demo go a little faster. So I'm going to copy that command to all three of my hosts. You can see that these are those three containers I told you about that we're going to start up. The one that's Docker, the Docker named one, the Rancher agent state, and finally there's going to be one that's a running Rancher agent. So if I come back to my screen, I close it, and you can see that all these three hosts have now successfully connected to Rancher server. The other thing that you can do, so just to show you a demo of being able to launch things through Docker Machine, I'm going to, DigitalOcean for me is the easiest one. I'm going to pause real quick while I grab my my access key just so I don't share it with all of you. Start. So I've pasted it in. Next, you'll be able to configure. These are all options in the Docker machine driver. So you can spin up however you want. I'll just add another 3. Select your region, your type, your size. These are all different options. And then I'm going to add some labels to my host. And we'll explain what you can do with labels to your host a little later. I'm just going to put one label in. So now what happens is we launch the Docker machine command. It's going to start to, set up the machine. It's going to take a little bit just because it's like when you run a regular Docker machine command. It's going to reach out to DigitalOcean. It's going to start to create the droplet. Once the droplet's created, we will automatically SSH. I think Docker machine automatically SSHs and installs Docker. And then the final step that we do is we will SSH in and run that Rancher agent command that I showed you earlier under the custom page. So this will take a little bit while it's going. I'm just going to jump really quickly. I'm going to do the exact same things, but in a different environment. So in my Kubernetes environment. So here, right up here, we're in our default environment. You can see that we have 6 hosts. If I go to my Kubernetes environment and I go to my host page, you'll see that I actually have no host. So that's kind of, once again, the segregation of hosts between environments. You'll never be able to share a host across environments. I know that question has come up before. So I'm going to grab the custom command from here. The difference between here is there's different tokens that get associated so that when Rancher server and Rancher agent connects, they'll be known for which environment. So I'm just going to grab this command. I'm going to put it into, I have 3 other hosts here. You can see same thing. All I did was pre-pull some images to try and speed up the demo. And launch those 3. And then in a little bit, they'll pop up here. So one unique thing about Kubernetes is that after my host gets started in Kubernetes, you're going to see we'll automatically start launching what we call a system stack or Kubernetes stack, where it's going to start launching all these services that we have to be able to run Kubernetes, to be able to plug in Rancher with Kubernetes. So this will take a little bit just because I didn't actually pre-pull any of these images. So I will, you can see that it's going to start adding all these. I'm going to go back to our default environment, which is running cattle. Take a look. You can see there's different states of what's going on. And also a couple other things that are environment specific. You can add in certificates. So certificates would be used for when you launch a load balancer. If you want to do SSL termination, you would add your certificates here. The other is, by default, we use, when you start pulling images, we pull from the public Docker Hub registry. If you have any private registries, even on Docker Hub or in Quay.io or somewhere, you could add your registries here, or your own private registry. You'd be added here. And the registries are environment specific as well. Next is we're going to actually, now that I don't need to wait, all of my hosts are all up. So now that all of our hosts are up, I'm going to actually start a service. So what is a service? A service is just basically a Docker container. The only difference is that it's a Docker container with a scale. So you have the ability to determine how many of those containers that you want, and it would be running the same Docker run command for all the containers in that service. I'm going to give an example of Ghost. There's a Ghost image out there. It is a blogging platform. I like to use this as a simple example because it has a port that's exposed in the container, and then I can expose that port to the host, and then I can do a quick demo of, if you go into that host, you would then be able to see at whatever port you decide to expose, it would direct your traffic into the container. By default, we always have always pull image before creating checked. What this means is anytime you would create before you do a Docker run command, we would do a Docker pull of that image. I'm going to uncheck that for my use case just because I've actually already pulled the images. The use case of why you would want to check that is, if you're creating your own Docker images and you use the same tag over and over again, the only way, a way to guarantee that you're always getting the latest of whatever you've pushed out there is to leave this check box. So in my Ghost containers, I have 2368 is exposed. You can either, there's a couple options that you have out there in terms of selecting what host port you want. You can either leave it blank. If you leave it blank, we automatically will assign a random port at like a high number, so it won't usually get a conflict, so that you'll be able to easily access it. Or you could just put in your own port as well. I think there are no other options. Down here, when you create a container, you know how there's lots of options in a Docker run command. Those options all exist as well in these additional tabs. So there's command, under volumes you have stuff, networking, there are a bunch of choices, host security, things that you would want to specify regarding that, and labels. You could add additional labels. And then the two that are kind of Rancher specific, they're like Rancher services. One is a health check. And what a health check does is basically within Rancher behind the scenes, we allow it so that, I can show you what one of them looks like. You'd be able to set what port, where you would want to do the health check, and like set some kind of interval in terms of always kind of pinging to say, hey, is this container still alive? And, I highly recommend putting health checks on your containers, because then what happens is, say a host goes down, or for whatever reason the container is no longer healthy, Rancher would then automatically spin up a new container to maintain the scale so that you always would have the scale for your healthy containers. The other one is scheduling. That is out there. That's, I think, super helpful. So you can schedule against lots of flexibility out there. So we have hard and soft affinities. So, saying that you would only want to schedule containers on certain hosts. You could schedule against the host label. So host label is kind of the label that I put on the host earlier. So you could schedule against those labels. You could schedule against labels if you added it to your service, against the service name or container name. So in this case, because I've added, I don't know if we remember, we added that host, all my Docker machine created hosts, I added in the LB equals true label. I actually want all of these containers in this service to not run on that host, on those hosts, just because I've already pre-pulled the image. So here I can say the host must not have a label, and then we pre-populate what your options of labels on your host already exist. So, all right, I don't want it where the LB equals true. I'm going to create that. Oh, turn off health check. Go. So a couple things to note. The very first thing that happens when you start launching services in Rancher is we automatically start this container called network agent. So the network agent is that's kind of where Rancher does all its networking and health checks. So we have our own managed overlay network that we have running. Here you can see each visual IP address to space. And the network agent is really what does do all the networking. So you need, on your host, to be able to have that communication across the host, you need to have UDP ports 500 and 4500 open. And a nice test I like to do usually is, let's see, I'm going to exec into one of these containers. And if I ping the IP, I'm going to ping the IP on this other host, that container. You can see that I have the communication between the two hosts. So if you ever have like, it seems like your networking's failing, that's like the first test that I always do is, hey, can you ping, or I ask our users, can you ping across the networks? In our in our docs, in our frequently asked questions under our troubleshooting. We have a whole section about cross-host communication. So, if it looks like your containers aren't able to ping each other across the host, check out the docs, see if any of these things that have come up the past for other people apply to you. So here, let me go back to our stacks. And so here, a stack is basically a group of services. So it's really just an organizational tool that Rancher has introduced. We have the ability, you could create all your microservices under one stack. There's definitely benefits for that, where you could easily see the relationship between your services. We also have the Docker Compose YAML equivalent of it. We'll cover that in a little bit. So Stacks is just an organizational tool. So let's see, our Ghost app is up and running. You can see, you'll always be able to see kind of the status of your stack and your services. If something is stopped, we'll go and put a big red flag to, say that service is stopped, so you can go check out what's going on. And then the cool thing is, so I remember how I exposed port 80 on the host, but this very lovely handy link. I can click on it. It will automatically direct me to one of the hosts that is running the container. And because I use that port, it automatically directs me into the Ghost container itself. A couple things in terms of the Rancher UI that is always very handy. If you click on this little this information button, here's like what I call the summary. I personally call the summary view of the service. So you what the status is, you can see. So if there's like a container that has any issues, you would be able to see which one. Click on that container to run the commands of the container. You'd be able to see the ports and all the hosts that it's running and the host IP. So I could click into any of these to go to that host instead, and you'd be able to see if there's any links to that container as well. Okay, I'm going to pause there real quick because it's a good stopping point, Shannon, to see if you have any questions or.
Yeah, there were a couple of interesting questions that came in, mostly around, there was one around networking and another one, around managing environments. The networking question is worth kind of a quick discussion on. The question was, what networking service are we using under the hood to make it so that the containers can talk to each other? And as I mentioned, and I think I responded to everyone on this one, so you should be able to see it. We actually built our own overlay networking implementation since the very first release of Rancher. It's based on IPsec. It's really cool. It's very fast, and it also allows us to do encrypted communication between hosts running in different locations, so different things that are communicating over the internet. However, once the next main release of Rancher, which will come out later this month, we're introducing pluggable networking modules. So with pluggable networking and pluggable storage, at the time of creating an environment, you can actually decide for that environment what type of network overlay you want to use. So anything that has a CNI driver can be implemented and deployed and plugged into the network, and that'll work in Kubernetes environments, Cattle environments, Mesos environments. In Swarm environments, they use another framework called libnetwork, so we'll be supporting that for the Swarm environments. That may come a little bit later. But the idea is, if you want to use VXLAN, if you want to use, kind of our native networking, it'll all work just as seamlessly. It just will pick from, some available drivers or upload your own, and then, Rancher will set up and deploy the network for you and manage its health. So, good question on networking.
You said there was also one about managing environments?
Yeah, I think I answered that one though, so I think we're good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the next one I'm going to do is, so I did services stack because I'm going to create another applet. I'm going to actually do a little more complicated of an application. Not really that complicated, but it's a nice simple demo. So first I'm going to start. I have this Nginx app that my coworker has created. The only difference in that app is, or in her Docker file when she created the image, is that she made it so that there is a specific HTML, there's a specific URL that I could go to, and you could actually see the Docker container ID. So I'm going to spin up a bunch of these. I'm going to, I'll spin up a bunch. And I'm actually going to schedule them all once again, not on my hosts that have my, I'm going to spin them up on the hosts that have my image pre-pulled. So that should take not that long. Next is I'm going to add a load balancer. So far all I've been doing is adding like simple Docker containers. So a couple things that Rancher has added or introduced is we have the ability to add a load balancer. So our load balancer is just running an HA proxy software inside. We have some customization that you can do. In the next release of Rancher, there'll be even more, not the next one, I think in an upcoming stable release, we'll be having even more options of customizing your HA proxy. But here, I'm going to select always run one instance of this container, just because when you start exposing ports on a host, I usually like to select the always run one instance, just because that guarantees that you'll always have enough hosts to satisfy whatever you need. Because if you choose a scale that's outside of the bandwidth that you'll be able to, you'll get a port conflict, and you won't be able, your service would never be able to complete because it can't find enough hosts with ports. Let me put in my load balancer. For how you direct your traffic from your load balancer into your containers, you would select that service. I'm going to select the NGINX. If you want, we also support layer 7 load balancing, so that is being able to do host name routing. So you could select specific host names, sort of based on path. You could do different ports. There's lots of options out there. In this demo, we'll just do the most basic, which is just going directly to the service. But if that's something that you're interested in, under our Ducks, under Cattle, under our load balancers, you can read about the different options using either the UI or Rancher Compose of those more complicated options. Now for this one, I'm going to actually schedule this onto those hosts that I've indicated that I want my load balancer to run. I'm going to create that. That one will take a little bit longer just because the image hasn't been pre-pulled. It's going to do that same thing where it's going to first pre-pull the image for the network agent, and then it's going to launch the load balancer. One thing in the UI, I automatically check this just by default, but I know it's unchecked usually. If it's unchecked, you won't be able to see the network agent. So, I like to check it to see, status of everything that's going on. So here you can see, right now the load balancer is initializing. Initializing means that all it's doing is it's checking that cross-host communication is working, because all of our load balancers automatically have a health check on it. So now you can see that's running. I'm going to go to that port. It's directing itself into the NGINX container, and I could refresh, and you would be able to, in theory, see that it goes to all the NGINX containers. But refreshing this page isn't going to be very helpful because it gives you no indication of which Docker container it's going to. So I'm going to go into that special URL I talked about earlier that my coworker created. You can see here the container ID popped up. And so here I can go, let me minimize some windows to clean it up a little. Here we can now start hunting down on which container this is. So I'm just looking for anything that has Syncada, test new host routing, that starts with EF. It doesn't look like it's on that host. Let's check this one. It doesn't look like it's on this host. Let me go to my last one. And here I found it. It's running on this one. It's the one that's suffixed with number 3. If I do a refresh, it goes to 2780. That one went through, it's right here on a different host. So hopefully that gives you an example of how our load balancer directs the traffic across the containers. Right now we just have a round robin algorithm, so it just goes through them in a cycle. Let's see. Another thing to note is there are a couple other services that we have. So we have service alias. What you can do there is you could create a way to redirect. It's a good way. It's just so we have try to think of a good way or a nice, easy way to explain it. So we have our own internal DNS running for all of our containers, and so if you wanted to target a container using a specific name instead of whatever name you've given it, you might create a service alias so that you could find that service instead. And then if you have services that are outside of Rancher that you might want to connect to, you could create what we call an external service where you could point to that target IP or point to a specific host name. So next I want to cover over basically, so everything that we've done right now is all in the UI. I think the UI, if you're new to Docker, you haven't really used Docker that much, this is, I think, a very easy Docker just because it puts everything in a nice, easy user experience. But, you know, there's going to be people out there who either want to use, not the UI, they want to use, maybe they want to create their own scripts using our API. So I'm going to cover over the API a little bit. There's also the ability to use Docker Compose or Rancher Compose. Docker Compose files and use it with our what we call Rancher Compose or our Rancher CLI, which is new in this version that I have running as well. So first, everything's in the UI. Let's cover what the API has. So if you go to API, you'll be able to see the endpoints in our most recent version that we're running. We're just starting to introduce our V2 of our API. Able to get a V2 API beta, our beta endpoint as well. Here, if I click on it, you'll be able to see all the different options. We do have documentation of the API as well on the doc site. Here, we could go through, let me see, what is usually a good, easy one to give a nice demo. So if we go to services, you should be able to create, here you could create your different services. Here you then could, if you click on show request, you'd be able to see the curl command that would be allowed. So anything that is done in the UI is just an API call. There's nothing fancy behind the scenes. And then I never went back to, you know, after we turned on access control, what would happen if, you know, in my Safari window that I had logged in earlier, what happens? Let me go back. It will now no longer automatically log in you, and you'd have to log in as a user. And then also same thing with the API. If you try and use the API, it would require you to put in an access key and secret key. So that's how you kind of know that now your Rancher server is, you know, locked down in terms of intruders. This covers over the API. So next is our Rancher Compose CLI or our Rancher CLI. I'm going to first cover Rancher Compose just because it's probably a little easier or a little more basic to understand. And then the Rancher CLI I think is super cool, so we'll definitely cover that next. Here, I'm just going to download it. I always have multiple versions of it running. So let's see, I'm just going to grab a new window. Let's go to where I downloaded it. Okay. So here you'll see I have the binary running. First thing is you'll want to create a Docker Compose YAML. So if you're not familiar with Docker Compose, What it is it's this ability to be able to create services instead of just using the command line, to be able to use kind of like a template. I'm going to go into my NGINX app. One of the cool things that we have is that you could, anything that you've created in the UI, you can actually look at what we call the Compose YAML. I think under the options, under a stack, it's called View Config. You would be able to see the equivalent Docker Compose YAML and Rancher Compose YAML. The difference between the Docker Compose YAML and the Rancher Compose YAML is the fact that anything in the Rancher Compose side is something that is Rancher specific. So if you should be able to take what's in the Docker Compose YAML and then spin it up using Docker Compose without any errors, but then the Rancher Compose side is what you would use so that in Rancher it would spin up the way you want it to. So I'm just going to copy this app that we created earlier. Copy and paste it in. I'm going to actually change what the exposed port is just so that I don't have a conflict. Pick this one. I'm going to create a random. Copy that as well. And now you can see that I have both files up there. So next would be to run a Rancher Compose command. So you can run the command. Obviously, there's a couple things that you would need to do to be able to start talking to Rancher servers. So one is you need to obviously indicate what the URL of where your Rancher server is at. I'm going to add in all of these options in as an option in my Rancher Compose command, just because I go through different Rancher setups all the time. But most of you should, the best way for you to do it is probably set up an environment variable on your system where you can set what the URL is. We're going to have to add in an access key, which is just an API access key, and an API secret key so that you would be able to then connect to that specific environment. So here I'm going to go to API. I'm going to say add environment API key. Copy the access key, pass it in my secret key. I'm going to create a stack name. If you don't put in a stack name, it will automatically default to what folder you're in. So I like to create a stack name, otherwise all my stacks will end up coming under this Rancher Compose folder name. So this is my Compose test. We'll do an up. That just means let's create and start all the services. And then I always add in a -d afterwards, which means to not block, and you can not block it afterwards, so it will return back to the command line for me. Should go fairly fast just because all the images are already pulled. Here you can see it started up that one, it went very fast, and then now it's starting up the load balancer as well. So that's like a quick demo of how to use Rancher Compose. In Rancher Compose, there are some other functionalities where you can, in the UI, you can do it where you can upgrade services. So you can change your service. When you upgrade, it's the reason why it's a separate container is because Docker containers are immutable. So you would basically stop your existing container and start a new container with your new configuration. I'm going to quickly download the Rancher CLI. So the Rancher CLI, the Rancher Compose is really good for environment-specific, just being able to run and launch services, whereas the Rancher CLI allows you to give you a lot more flexibility, or what would I say? You'd be able to do a lot more in your entire Rancher setup. So the first thing you would do is do run Rancher config. I have something already set up from before, so I'm going to ignore what's there because I got to set it up for my current one. For Rancher CLI, you would actually want to create an API key. the difference between the account versus environment is that the account gives you access to your entire Rancher setup versus just that specific environment. And then here you can see that I have 2 environments in my Rancher setup, and so it's going to ask me, well, which one do you want to interact with? So I'm going to select the first one, the default. So now under Rancher, there's a lot of options that you can do. We can, we could do Rancher PS, which shows all the services that we have running. You can do Rancher hosts that show all the hosts in there. You can, there's like all kinds of, I feel like I could go on forever about what you can do with Rancher CLI. So, you can glance through quickly of a couple of the commands. This is still in beta. We just only recently announced it. We're still refining it, but at least the current version and what the commands exist do, we do have documented under docs.rancher.com under Rancher CLI. So take a look at that. Okay. I know we're coming up on the hour. I have at least 2 more topics to cover, so hopefully everyone can stay a little bit longer. I'm going to go to catalog. The next is the Rancher catalog, basically a catalog of templates, and the templates compose of Docker Compose and Rancher Compose files. So really, if someone has already taken the time to create those Compose files to be able to spin up an application, you would be able to essentially one-click into and launch it and be able to launch an application quickly. Let's see, I'm going to use the janitor service. Great things about Rancher Catalog is that because they're different templates, there's different versions that you have available. I'm actually going to launch an older version just to show you some of the cool flexibility that you have with it. Here you can see in the preview section, you'd be able to see what the Docker Compose and Rancher Compose file consisted of when you wanted it. I'm going to launch it. Now I launched, as I said, I picked an older version specifically because whenever a new update gets pushed to the catalog just reads from GitHub repos. We have our own community catalog, which is where the community has contributed a bunch of these applications. They help keep it up to date. If people have issues, they follow them, they fix them up, so it's great that the community is involved. We have our own Rancher certified catalog, which are catalog entries that we've created that we're committed to supporting and maintaining. So if there are issues there, we try and address them. But anytime a new catalog entry comes in for, say, your template or your service, your application that you've selected, you'd be able to quickly see that an upgrade is available, and you'd be able to one-click in, pick the latest version that you have. You'd be able to see what you're currently on and see what is available out there for you to upgrade, and you'd be able to click on upgrade. And what it would do is it will automatically start stopping the services in the old one and start launching ones in the new one. So everything here is what we have publicly. If you wanted to create your own private catalog, that is something we also support. Under the admin, under settings, here you can start adding in your own custom catalogs based on specific branches, and then they would be refreshed and populated in Rancher as well.
There was actually a question, Denise, earlier about using CI/CD tools that I think Bob asked, and he was asking, does Rancher have its own CI/CD baked in, or should I launch something from the catalog? And I think I had responded to him that I think launching from the catalog, we don't have our own CI/CD. Most users have some existing CI/CD tool baked in, but often what they do is they do use that existing CI/CD tool and then connect it to the private catalog feature that Denise is showing right now, so that when they push out new versions, the catalog gets updated with the latest version, and any applications that have been deployed from it kind of triggers an opportunity to upgrade those applications. So as you're going through and talking about the private catalog, it'd be great to just maybe show how that versioning works.
Sure. So that's okay. So if you want to create a private catalog, One is, you know, our folder structure is a little picky in terms of how our catalog service picks up that you have a private catalog. So in the docs, under Rancher Catalog, under creating private catalog, we do talk about what the folder structure would need to be in terms of if you want to create, templates for your cattle environment or your Kubernetes environment. It gives you a little description of, you know, what are some fields that you would need to put in, how you can do certain things. But if you want, I scroll down to the bottom very quickly because, you know, the hardest part is doing the directory structure. So someone has pointed out that, you know, someone out there had created this open source project to be able to just create an empty folder structure for catalogs that you could use to just get that baseline set up. So you could go to that project to see what's going on and then populate that within your template. So let me go into GitHub. Under GitHub, you would be able to see, so templates is where cattle is running. Cattle environments read all their templates. I am using the janitor one. And here you can see that there's different folders for each version that was out there. And I had initially launched, you know, version 2. We found that that's not necessarily the best way to find out which versions are available. So we've also, we kind of refined what is available out there in terms of how to determine your upgrade based on versioning. There's a couple options out there where you can say, you know, certain versions, certain templates require a minimum Rancher version. You could, you know, deprecate some templates by using a maximum version available. Let's see where those options are here. Like a minimum Rancher version, a maximum Rancher version. There's been use cases that we found where we've created a new template, but we only want you to upgrade to that template from other templates. So now we've added that ability. So, you know, as we go along, as we find these use cases for our catalog service, we refine them and add in new fields for it as well, or new capabilities to it. So here you can see whenever you upgrade, this is a great scenario, whenever you upgrade a service or a catalog entry, what happens is you go into the state where all of your old containers are still running, they're just stopped, and all your new containers are running now. And the reason why we do that is so that, you know, when you upgrade something, you're going to want to test out to make sure the new containers are doing what you expect it to. After you've done all your testing, then you can make the decision of whether or not you want to finish the upgrade, or, you know, if you realize that something went terribly wrong, like you need to go back to whatever the previous one is, you can choose rollback, and that rolls back to your original version. I'm going to finish my upgrade. And once I finish that, it's now running the latest version of Janitor, and you can see that it's up to date.
Hey, Denise, while you were talking, there was a question that came in on this. Grigory asked if it was possible to use an NFS or SAN mount for hosting a private catalog instead of a GitHub or GitLab repo or something like that. Do you know if that's possible?
I'm not positive. I know the main requirement is that it needs to be able to, it needs a URL that a git clone can handle. So there's a little URL in our docs here of what a git clone can handle. So that would, I've never read it because we always use GitHub. So if you click here, maybe Gregory, this would be able to answer your question. To see if basically, because we do a git clone to just grab the information. Okay, so that's basically everything I have today to cover about the cattle side of container orchestration. I'm going to go into our Kubernetes stack next. So, like, you know, if you want to say,
there's one or two. that I wanted to kind of try and jump into, answer really quickly. There was a question from Luke, and he was saying, when you upgrade a service, how does Rancher deal with existing traffic or connections to the existing containers? That's a really good question, Luke. I mean, we're using HA proxy as the load balancer, and you can do quite a bit of configuration of that HA proxy if you want to do anything beyond sort of standard. What typically users do, though, as part of the upgrade is they simply they do kind of a rolling upgrade where containers will get shut down and a new container will get launched, or a container will get launched and then the old container will get shut down. So the most standard approach doesn't take anything into account in terms of session draining or connection handling at the moment. There are other approaches that people do to do this where they'll sort of turn on a new service and then kind of drain off the old service and eventually turn that off. You can do that with some other load balancers as well, like Traffic and the Catalog are really good for that type of thing. So I don't know if that answers your question completely. We have been looking at doing some sort of session draining in an upcoming feature, so it's definitely something we'd like to see. There was another question that came in, and it was Elaine, I think, asked, could we host the catalog on our Rancher system itself using like GitLab? And the answer is yes, of course, Elaine. Yeah, if you launched it in Rancher, as long as we can access it and get to it, then you can absolutely host it yourself. There's no reason you couldn't do that. So good question. Thanks for that. There was another question about monitoring and alerting. Jigish asked, how about monitoring or alerting? Is there a plugin so I can hook up with Rancher if I need to get alerted if new container gets launched, deleted, etc.? There are a number of great monitoring solutions, Jigish. In fact, actually, our meetup this month, which is in 2 weeks, is going to focus on comparing 3 really popular monitoring solutions within Rancher: Sysdig, Datadog, and Prometheus. All 3 are in the catalog. You can launch a Prometheus cluster very easily and use that to monitor Rancher. It's open source. It's very good, very popular tool, and the implementation in the catalog is excellent. So I would definitely say if you're looking for a good monitoring solution, you could definitely deploy Prometheus. And then, we actually internally, we use Sysdig. We're big Sysdig fans around here, and we use Sysdig Cloud and pay for that. We think it's excellent. So that's a good solution. I know some of our guys like Datadog a lot, so we'll be looking at those 3 in our next meetup, but any of them should be good options for you in terms of getting alerting. The implementation of Prometheus, it was done actually by the community, and it's very good. It also does a lot of Rancher-specific metrics and monitoring. So it looks at the Rancher management server, how that's performing, if there's any issues there. So it can really help you if you're having any issues with Rancher itself. So definitely would recommend that. I know there's lots of more questions that have been coming in. There was a question about storage that Bob asked, Bob Zhang, and he was saying, what's the current support of storage options in Rancher? Enterprises may have different storage options, say SAN, NAS, hardware, software-defined storage like Ceph, Gluster, Sheepdog. I think it's not something we talked about much, but the way Rancher supports storage is a little bit different from orchestration tool across the different orchestration tools. But basically, we plug in Docker volume drivers or FlexVols into Kubernetes to allow you to deploy a storage service as part of your cluster. If you go into the catalog, you'll find a number of things called Rancher Convoys, and Convoy are Docker volume drivers that can be deployed. Currently, the most popular approaches are to use the Rancher NFS or Convoy NFS. It's very reliable. You can connect it to most NAS hardware, and and there's one for I think Amazon EFS as well that gives you good distributed file system for your containers. For a while we had a Gluster service in there, but we had a lot of problems. People had operating Gluster, so you're certainly welcome to deploy your own Gluster and connect that through the NFS. We're going to be rolling out a number of additional storage services over the next few months. There's an implementation of Scale.io. There's a nice tool from EMC called RexRay that's in the catalog that does really good storage volume management. You can deploy that and mount EBSs and such. So there's quite a few options for deploying either directly to existing storage or launching software-defined storage. And in 1.2, we're making that, like the networking stuff, a sort of a separate catalog. We're going to call it an infrastructure catalog that understands the relationships between these infrastructure services and the different orchestration platforms, so they plug them in more directly. It should be really cool. It means you can sort of spin up a cluster, say I want to use a specific type of storage and networking in this cluster, and that will get laid down and scaled as the cluster scales or as anything changes within that cluster. So some really cool stuff there. But the NFS approach right now is probably the most reliable and definitely the way I would recommend anyone going who's putting stuff in production that needs persistence. Okay, there was a number of other questions that came in. And I think there was a couple about alerting and monitoring, and hopefully we covered that. Rancher is more of a visibility, has more like visibility capabilities than monitoring capabilities. So if you look, we pull stats, we can tell you logs, but we don't persist that stuff. You really want to use something like Prometheus if you want to have more of a real visibility and alerting type of system. There was another question about logging, and again, on the logging side, there's a really good implementation of ElkStack and a nice driver for Loggly in the catalog to logging management and centralization. Bob asked if it's possible to choose the underlying container engine, say use Rocket instead of Docker. Also, could I choose to use CoreOS or other container OS instead of Rancher OS? So, two good questions. On the OS side, Rancher runs on any modern Linux OS. So there, while we have Rancher OS ourselves that we build, we have tons of people using Rancher on RHEL, on CentOS, on Ubuntu, on Fedora, on CoreOS, on all sorts of different things, Snappy. As long as the OS has a reasonably modern version of Docker, we use them all the same. So they're all great options for running your OS. The second question, though, is can I use it with Rocket instead of Docker? At the moment, no, we do not support Rocket. That would be, we definitely have to do some work to support Rocket, and right now we're just not seeing enough demand to justify that. But if we started to see a lot of demand for Rocket, obviously we would want to work with it and support it. So right now, yes on any OS that's Linux, no at the moment on Rocket or any kind of forks of Docker. Right now we're pretty close to Docker, and you'll find that that's where all of the vast majority of our users are as well. There was a question from Constantine. He said, is it possible to connect Rancher to an existing Kubernetes cluster? At the moment, no, Constantine. It's a great question. It's a feature that we're kind of excited to add, but we have not added it yet. So right now, Rancher, in order for Rancher to provide Kubernetes management, the lifecycle management of the Kubernetes cluster, understanding that it is a Kubernetes cluster and monitoring the replication controllers, the pods, the stacks, these kind of things, we have to launch it because it's actually our distribution of Kubernetes that plugs into our network and does some stuff with us. You can deploy Rancher agents on existing running hosts that are running Docker and get all of the infrastructure level visibility. But so in this tab that Denise is showing you, you'd see the infrastructure that was running as part of it, and you'd be able to get visibility into those containers, but you wouldn't be able to have the management of that Kubernetes cluster. If it's something you're interested in, definitely shoot me an email. You can email me. Anyone can if you have questions afterwards at Shannon@rancher.com or Denise@rancher.com. And we'll try. We're definitely looking for people interested in doing this because it's something we're looking at doing in an upcoming release. So we'd love to have anyone who wants to trial it out and give us some feedback on what they would want out of that. Mike asked the last question I have, Denise. It's any plans for registry for dependency audits? I think this is Mike. I'm not quite sure I understand your question, but right now Rancher doesn't. We don't bundle in a registry of any kind or do any sort of audit enforcement on that registry. We sort of we work with all the registries: Nexus, Docker Hub, Docker's, DTR, JFrog, so Artifactory. I mean, really anything that is a registry that can expose Docker, we can plug into, and a lot of those have really cool dependency audits and services around security that sort of do assessment of what's actually in a container and am I okay running it. We want to make more of that stuff visible inside of Rancher, so I think we'll be doing some work around that from a registry perspective. But at the moment, it's not something we're bundling into Rancher in any way. So we don't we think that problem is pretty well solved by the registry people. We don't really see value in adding it ourselves. There is a great registry of just a native Docker registry that is baked in, that's in the catalog, that I think is very popular with users. So, okay, I think that's all the questions I have. Denise, did you want to dive into some of the stuff you were asking?
Yep, I was just going to cover Kubernetes at least. So, I think when we add environments, you have the ability to select your container orchestrations. I just set up one for Kubernetes real quick for the demo sake, but we also have the ability to launch a Mesos framework, and you could see, I think they're called applications or templates in Mesos. And then currently the Swarm, I know with Docker 1.12 out, it gets a little confusing in terms of what is Swarm, at least here, versus what we have. This is actually referring to the previous version of Swarm. In our next release, we will be having the ability to support what's SwarmKit, which is in Docker 1.12, just to note. But what happens usually is when you want to use that container orchestration type, for those who were paying attention on the screen while Shannon was doing, what I just did is I actually, one of the kubelets had some issues starting on the host. I didn't have the time to really debug or look into it, so I just killed that host just so that we could get the Kubernetes stack up and running. So the Kubernetes stack it runs under, what's it called? Under the system stacks. And these stacks are really what Rancher uses to be able to plug into Kubernetes. One thing to note is, right now in our stable version, we only have templates for Kubernetes 1.2. But in our development build right now, we have templates for Kubernetes 1.3, and then when we officially release our next release 1.2 with Kubernetes support, we'll actually be supporting the Kubernetes 1.4. So here we have the ability, it's very similar to the cattle side, where there is a catalog of something that you could easily launch and click, what's out there, you can launch it. That's strange. Okay, let me pick a different entry. I'll have to look into that a little bit later. Let's see if this one shouldn't. Okay. Launch that, and what it does is it actually just starts to launch services onto our host. Here, a couple of things to note. If you are more familiar with creating your own Kubernetes templates, you could actually just go directly to services, add your services in here, copy and paste your templates. If you're mostly used to the kubectl command line, you go to kubectl, you could generate your config here, you paste it in, and then you could start, creating services using the templates that you already have locally. You could also start just using kubectl in, like, I think here, if I wanted to do. I could start using kubectl to see what service is. So this is that service I ran from the catalog and what's available. That's probably I know we're over in time. That's like a high-level introduction of how we so in our more recent ones, I usually like to highlight things that we've added. We've added ingress support. So if you create like an ingress template, it'll take advantage of the Rancher load balancer abilities to be able to create support that ingress. All those things are detailed under in the docs under Kubernetes ingress support. It talks about how DNS works, our internal DNS works in Kubernetes environment. So if there are any questions about that, like, there's a bunch of information that you can find either on our docs. There's a couple limitations that even the Kubernetes ingress has that we've actually created a way in the template so that we can support, we can support ports outside of just port 80, being able to do like some hostname routing concepts in there. So, check out the docs to see what's out there and then let us know. I mean, if you ever have any questions, or if you're trying to do something and don't know what to do, I always advocate, the forums, our GitHub for our issues. Our community is really active. I try my best to try and respond as much as I can as well. So I think
Thanks,
that's everything
Denise.
I
That was
have.
great. Yeah, that was great, Denise. Lots of great content today. Thank you to everyone. I mean, I can't believe it. I think everyone is still here 90 minutes later. So I'm glad we've had so much interest in the topic. One of the last questions that came in was from Ian, and he was asking about having some apps that whitelist IPs, and he's saying we'd rather abstract that to accommodate changing IPs per deployment. How can we facilitate fully qualified domain names for apps or stacks so we don't have to worry about IP address changes? That's a great question, Ian, and there's actually a really good solution in Rancher. Denise, do you want to kind of maybe talk about Route 53 and the DNS service integrations?
Yep, just switching over to the default, to the cattle environment. So under, in our catalog, let's see if I can sort by it. That'd be even, I don't know what the category is for it, actually. So here, under our catalog, we have, let me just find it, Route 53 DNS. So here, you could use Route 53 where basically any port that gets exposed, you would connect it to your Route 53 in Amazon, and then you would be able to get like an FQDN that would be able to automatically route to your services, so you wouldn't have to worry about which host it is on. There are actually, just trying to figure out, oh, here we go. I just searched DNS. There are actually a lot of providers that we have integration for. So I think Route 53 is the one that Rancher certifies, and then the rest are all community driven. So the community has actually created all these templates to be able to do that, and so you'd be able to connect to your DNS, external DNS, and be able to, will provide you the FQDN, and it will automatically forward it to the containers of any container or load balancer that has a port exposed.
Awesome.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that.
If you want to like practice or like test out what it's like in terms of how the external DNS is under, I think, the Rancher infrastructure services, under the, or maybe it's under cattle. Under cattle, it talks about, you know, we give the example of how you would do it for Route 53 and like what that happens, how the FQDN is like set up for in using Route 53. So it gives you a little more details of how you would be able to access that.
Yeah, and obviously Route 53 is just one of the you can take for this. Yeah, there's Cloudflare and a couple others. I mean, a number of vendors, PowerDNS, they put their own in there, but you can certainly also upload, you could create one of these very easily. The framework is all open source and external. So hopefully this gives everyone a good idea of how to get started with Rancher. I know we've covered a ton today. We are going to post this recording. I mentioned it. We post them every month. So I've been recording this whole thing. You'll be able to come back and watch it again if something wasn't clear. You like remember 2 days ago or 3 days ago that you did care about you know, storage or something. And you know, as I said, you know, Denise and I and our whole team are always here. Feel free to email us. Feel free to post on forums. We're happy to help. You know, Rancher's a big open source project. We love contributions. We love people suggesting fixes. There's a whole translate.rancher.com if you ever have some time and you want to try and put Rancher into a new language. We've got lots of people working on different languages for support. So get involved. You know, the community is really just as strong as everyone using it and making it. So we love to see all of you more down the line. So otherwise, Denise, thanks for a great demo as always and for showing us so much cool stuff. And thank you everyone else for attending. Have a wonderful evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you happen to be. Take care.
Thanks, Shannon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.